The Galactic Gladiator Arena was more than just a battleground, it was the pinnacle of intergalactic entertainment. Warriors from hundreds of planets traveled across the galaxy, risking life and limb for glory, survival, or simply a chance at freedom. Spectators filled the colossal stands, their roars shaking the arena walls as they placed bets on fighters, many of whom wouldn't last a single round. The latest event promised something new. A mysterious fighter had been added to the roster, one from a planet few had heard of, Earth. The promoters played it up, selling the idea that this human was a rare find, an unknown entity in a tournament dominated by massive, genetically engineered killers. Most assumed it would be a short-lived spectacle, a weakling from a backwater world thrown into the grinder for laughs. Inside the gladiator holding area, seasoned fighters traded bets. The general consensus was that the newcomer wouldn't last a minute. A six-armed brute named Zargoth cracked his knuckles, grinning at his fellow warriors. "I say we give him a good show before we crush him," he growled, his mandibles clicking in amusement. The others laughed, nodding in agreement. For them, this was just another routine fight. For the audience, it was entertainment. But no one, not even the bookkeepers, was prepared for what was about to happen. When Daniel Carter stepped onto the battlefield, the entire arena quieted. He wasn't what they expected. There were no bulging muscles, no glowing eyes or mechanical enhancements. He stood at an average height, dressed in simple combat gear, his posture relaxed. His brown eyes scanned the stadium with mild interest, as if he had seen bigger crowds before. The announcer's voice boomed overhead. "Introducing, a warrior from the mysterious planet Earth. A species so fragile, so unevolved, that its own gravity barely holds it together." Laughter rippled through the stands. Carter remained silent, rolling his shoulders. He had seen this before: underestimation, arrogance. It never ended well for the other guy. Across the arena, his opponents entered. Zargoth, the six-armed behemoth, led the charge, flanked by a reptilian berserker and a towering cybernetic monstrosity. They moved with casual confidence, enjoying the moment, knowing they had already won in their minds. A horn blared. The fight had begun. Zargoth lunged first, all six fists flying toward Carter's skull. The human didn't move until the last second. With effortless precision, he sidestepped, grabbed one of Zargoth's arms, and twisted. A sickening crack echoed across the arena as the limb was dislocated. The brute howled in agony. Carter didn't stop. With a fluid motion, he spun, using Zargoth's own momentum to flip him over. The alien crashed into the ground, momentarily stunned. The reptilian fighter charged next, claws extended. Carter ducked under a wild slash, grabbed a discarded blade from the sand, and in one clean motion, drove it straight into the creature's exposed throat. Blood spurted as the reptilian collapsed, gurgling its last breath. The cybernetic warrior hesitated. Carter met its glowing red eyes, tilting his head. "Still want to try?" he asked. The machine lunged anyway. Carter stepped forward, dodging a heavy strike, then reached for the exposed wiring on its neck. A quick tug, a spark of electricity, and the warrior's body seized before toppling over. Silence. Thousands of spectators sat frozen. 3 seasoned warriors had fallen in less than a minute. Carter exhaled, brushing off his hands like he had just finished an average workout. Then, the crowd erupted. Back in the gladiator barracks, the other fighters were still processing what they had just witnessed. Carter sat on a bench, wiping the blood off his blade with a casual flick of his wrist. Zargoth, now sporting a hastily bandaged arm, sat across from him, staring. The once mighty brute had gone from laughingstock to stunned observer in record time. "What the hell are you?" Zargoth finally muttered. Carter looked up, his expression neutral. "Just a guy." Another fighter scoffed. "You're not just a guy. You killed Rixer in one move. He's fought in over 100 battles." Carter shrugged. Should have kept his guard up. More murmurs spread through the room. Gladiators who had once dismissed him as a joke were now reassessing their stance. He wasn't the biggest, strongest, or fastest. But he was something far more dangerous, efficient. A robotic attendant entered, projecting the latest fight statistics onto the wall. Carter's name flickered into view. A moment later, his kill count updated. The entire system froze. Confused murmurs turned into stunned silence as the screen flickered repeatedly, struggling to process the numbers. One of the engineers outside shouted, "Something's wrong with the system! It can't handle his stats!" Carter merely raised an eyebrow. Then, slowly, the whispers began. Who was this human? The moment the scoreboard froze, the atmosphere in the arena shifted. Spectators leaned forward, murmuring in confusion. The screen flickered again, numbers rapidly appearing and disappearing as the system struggled to compute the kill count for Daniel Carter. Glitch? Someone muttered in the stands. But those who had fought in the arena for years knew better. The scoreboard had never malfunctioned before. It had recorded the most fearsome warriors in the galaxy, some with hundreds, even thousands of kills, and yet it had never once failed to update. In the control room, engineers scrambled to assess the problem. A technician with too many cybernetic implants to be considered fully organic was frantically running diagnostics. His mechanical eye twitched as he ran the numbers manually. "Sir?" he called to his supervisor, voice unsteady. "This isn't an error." The supervisor, a three-eyed reptilian, frowned. "Then what is it?" The technician gulped. "The system is rejecting Carter's kill count because it exceeds the maximum value we've ever programmed." The reptilian's three eyes blinked in sync. "How high is it?" The technician hesitated. "It's in the thousands." Silence fell over the control room. The supervisor stared at the screen, then at the human fighter now sitting calmly in the barracks, seemingly unaware of, or unconcerned by, the chaos he had just caused. "By the gods," the supervisor muttered. "Who the hell did we let into this arena?" In the barracks, Carter leaned back against the cold metal bench, arms crossed. He had noticed the unusual reaction from the arena's staff, but he didn't particularly care. Across from him, Zargoth sat with his one good arm resting on his knee, still watching Carter with an unreadable expression. Around them, other fighters whispered, throwing glances his way. The ones who had laughed at him earlier now seemed unsure whether to meet his gaze. Finally, one of them, an insect with razor-sharp mandibles, spoke. "They're saying your kill count is broken," he said cautiously. "That the system can't even process the number." Carter shrugged. "Not my problem." The insectoid shifted uncomfortably. "How many have you killed?" The room fell silent, all eyes on him. Carter exhaled, tilting his head slightly. "I stopped counting a long time ago." The way he said it, calm, emotionless, sent a chill through the room. Another fighter, a reptilian with scarred scales, scoffed. "That's impossible. No one has that many kills. Even the grand champion of the arenas has barely reached 500. And he's been fighting for over a century." Carter finally looked up, meeting the reptilian's skeptical glare. "I wasn't fighting in an arena." A heavy pause followed. Some understood immediately. Others took a moment, their faces shifting as realization dawned. Gladiators fought for sport, for glory. Their battles, while deadly, had structure, rules. But soldiers? Assassins? They killed for survival. For orders. For missions that never made it into history books. Carter leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on his knees. "Where I come from, we don't fight for cheers. We fight for wars that don't end." Zargoth exhaled through his nostrils. "You're a soldier." Carter didn't confirm or deny it, but his silence said enough. The insectoid warrior took a cautious step back, something that looked like fear creeping into his many eyes. "What kind of wars give a man thousands of kills?" Carter didn't answer. Instead, he let the question hang in the air. And that was somehow worse than any response he could have given. Word of Carter's kill count spread like wildfire. Within minutes, the once rowdy fighters in the barracks had grown quiet. Conversations became hushed, glances became wary. Even those who had once boasted about their own bloody histories seemed reluctant to compare them to his. But it wasn't just the fighters. The staff, the engineers, the medics, even the arena guards, had started looking at him differently. The playful mockery they had initially shown him had vanished, replaced by something more cautious. Fear. The numbers didn't lie. Carter had slaughtered more beings than entire platoons of gladiators combined. He wasn't just another warrior looking for fame, he was a predator, something far worse than any of them had anticipated. The arena's champion, a massive creature with bioluminescent scales, entered the barracks. Unlike the others, he showed no hesitation, striding confidently toward Carter. The other fighters instinctively stepped aside, giving him space. "Human," the champion rumbled. His voice was deep, resonant, like rolling thunder. "I have fought for 200 years. I have killed thousands. But I have never seen a warrior like you." Carter glanced up at him, unimpressed. "That's supposed to mean something?" The champion studied him, his golden eyes narrowing. "It means I want to know, do you fight for glory? Or do you fight because you have nothing else?" Carter's expression remained unreadable, but the way his jaw clenched just slightly was enough of an answer. The champion exhaled, stepping back. "Then you are the most dangerous thing this arena has ever seen." Around them, the other fighters exchanged glances. Some nodded in agreement. Others looked unsettled. For the first time in the arena's history, it wasn't the reigning champion who was feared the most. It was the quiet human who had barely broken a sweat. The arena's management had a problem, and they knew it. The Galactic Gladiator Arena thrived on spectacle, on bloody battles, dramatic victories, and the rise and fall of champions that kept audiences coming back for more. Fighters were meant to struggle, to claw their way up the ranks, losing limbs and lives along the way. Daniel Carter had broken that system in one night. A fighter like him wasn't just dangerous, he was boring. There was no struggle, no dramatic comebacks. He walked into the ring, dismantled his opponents in seconds, and walked out without so much as a scratch. The audience might have been stunned into silence at first, but now they were growing restless. They hadn't come to see a massacre, they had come to see a fight. And so, the arena's management made a decision. If Carter couldn't be beaten fairly, they would make sure he was beaten unfairly. His next match was against a creature twice his size, its body enhanced with experimental combat serums. It was faster, stronger, and nearly impervious to pain. They had also tampered with Carter's weapons, dulling the edges of his blades and overloading his energy pistol so it would malfunction after one shot. The fight lasted 13 seconds. Carter dodged the first charge, stepped inside the beast's swing, and shoved his malfunctioning pistol straight down its throat before pulling the trigger. The weapon overheated instantly, but that was exactly what he had counted on. The blast detonated inside the creature's skull, killing it instantly. Carter walked away without looking back. The next match, they poisoned his food. Not enough to kill him, just enough to weaken him, to slow him down. They hadn't accounted for the fact that, as a soldier, Carter had spent years building an immunity to a wide range of toxins. He felt the effects, sure, but not enough to matter. He still won. The match after that? They rigged the battlefield itself, planting explosive traps beneath the sand. Carter noticed the disturbed ground patterns within seconds and lured his opponent onto the mines instead. One by one, every dirty trick they tried failed. And each time, Carter adapted. By the end of the week, he had stopped acknowledging the sabotage entirely. It was just another obstacle, like bad weather, or a lack of ammunition in the middle of a mission. The arena's management was running out of options. But they weren't the only ones paying attention. The Galactic champions, the legends of the arena, the undefeated warriors whose names were etched into history, had been watching Carter's rise with growing interest. For some, it was curiosity. For others, it was concern. One champion, a towering warlord named Zorvok, had seen hundreds of fighters come and go. He had fought and killed the best of them. And yet, as he observed Carter from afar, he felt something new. Unease. He had seen killers before. But Carter wasn't just a killer. He was something else. Determined to understand the threat, Zorvok decided to test him, not in combat, but in the only way he knew how. Zorvok was a telepath, a rare gift among his species. With a single touch, he could read minds, uncover memories, and glimpse into the darkest corners of a being's soul. And so, under the guise of congratulating Carter on his latest victory, Zorvok extended a hand. Carter hesitated only for a moment before shaking it. The moment their hands met, Zorvok's mind was flooded with images. Not of battles in an arena. Not of staged fights for entertainment. But of war. Real war. Explosions ripping through city streets. The screams of soldiers and civilians alike. The unrelenting rhythm of gunfire in the dead of night. Blood pooling in the sand. A young Carter, rifle in hand, standing among bodies, not as a conqueror, not as a hero, but as a survivor. Zorvok stumbled back, breathless. His hands trembled as he looked at Carter. Carter merely raised an eyebrow. That was rude. Zorvok had no words. He had expected arrogance, pride, even cruelty. But all he had seen in Carter's mind was efficiency. Cold, calculated efficiency. No anger. No joy. Just a simple, practiced act of killing. And that terrified him more than anything. Carter was used to fighting strong opponents. He had fought alien mercenaries, genetically modified super soldiers, and entire enemy factions in his past life. The arena's best warriors weren't much different, stronger, maybe, but predictable. Except for one. The Butcher of Viekar. The name was whispered with a mix of reverence and fear. A warrior who had never been defeated. A legend among gladiators said to have killed his own warlord in single combat before being captured and forced into the arena. Unlike the others, he had never fought for glory. He fought because it was the only thing he knew how to do. When Carter stepped into the ring and saw the Butcher waiting for him, he knew instantly that this would be different. The Butcher was tall, his armor battered from years of battle, his stance relaxed but balanced. He did not roar, did not posture. He simply studied Carter, the way a predator studies another predator. Then he spoke. "You are the first fighter I've met who does not fight for sport." Carter said nothing. The Butcher nodded as if he understood. Then, without warning, he attacked. For the first time since arriving in the arena, Carter was forced to go on the defensive. The Butcher was fast. Not just physically, but mentally. He adjusted mid-strike, adapting to Carter's movements, anticipating his counters. It was like fighting a mirror image of himself. Blow after blow, the two exchanged strikes, either gaining the upper hand. The crowd, usually roaring with excitement, had fallen into stunned silence. This wasn't a gladiator fight. This was war. Carter finally managed to land a solid hit, driving his knee into the Butcher's ribs. The Butcher staggered back, but instead of anger, he smiled. "You are worthy," he said. Then he charged again. And Carter smiled back. The audience had been watching gladiator battles for years, but they had never seen anything like this. The fight between Carter and the Butcher of Viekar had stripped away the spectacle, the theatrics, the rehearsed brutality meant for entertainment. What they were witnessing now was something raw, something real. Blades flashed, bodies moved with terrifying precision, and every strike carried the weight of warriors who had spent their lives perfecting the art of survival. There were no wasted movements, no unnecessary flourishes, just cold, efficient violence. For the first time in the history of the arena, the spectators weren't cheering. They were holding their breath. Then, after what felt like an eternity, the Butcher stumbled. It was subtle, almost imperceptible to anyone who wasn't trained to see it. His stance faltered for half a second. Carter saw it. And in that half second, he struck. A feint to the left, a brutal knee to the solar plexus, and a final, bone-crushing strike to the side of the Butcher's head. The legendary warrior collapsed to his knees, gasping. Carter stepped back, waiting. The Butcher exhaled, then looked up, meeting Carter's eyes. "You win," he said, a smile ghosting his lips. Carter extended a hand. The Butcher took it. The arena exploded into chaos. The crowd's reaction wasn't what the arena's management had expected. There was no disappointment, no calls for blood. Instead, they were chanting. Carter's name. The human who had been dismissed as weak. The fighter they had rigged fights against. The soldier who had taken down their greatest warrior. The people loved him. That was a problem. The entire Gladiator system thrived on its champions, its heroes and villains carefully curated to keep audiences engaged. Fighters rose through the ranks, but they did so in a way that was controlled, predictable. No one was supposed to break the system. Carter hadn't just broken it. He had shattered it. Back in the control room, the arena's overseers were scrambling. "This is getting out of hand," one of them muttered. Another growled. "If we don't stop him now, we'll lose control of the entire show." The reptilian supervisor from before narrowed his eyes. "Then maybe it's time we remind the audience who's really in charge." Carter had suspected something was off when the guards escorted him out of the barracks and deeper into the facility. They didn't take him to the usual medical wing or prep chambers. They took him somewhere else. Somewhere quieter. A reinforced steel door slid open, revealing a dimly lit chamber filled with containment pods. Inside, warriors lay unconscious, suspended in stasis. Carter frowned. "What is this?" The reptilian overseer stepped forward, a smug grin on his face. "This," he said, gesturing to the prisoners, "is the real arena." Carter's gaze hardened. The overseer continued. "Did you really think this was just about combat? About warriors proving themselves in fair fights? No, human. The arena is a business. We control the outcomes. We decide who wins, who loses. And when fighters stop being profitable, they disappear." Carter glanced at the pods again. Some of the faces inside were familiar. Fighters who had supposedly died in the arena, their deaths mourned or celebrated by the crowd. They hadn't died. They had been taken. His jaw clenched. "Why?" The overseer chuckled. "The same reason anyone does anything. Money. Betting on gladiator fights is one thing, but controlling those bets? Ensuring the outcomes? That's where the real power is." Carter was silent for a moment. Then, in a voice colder than the steel walls around them, he said, "You've made a mistake." The overseer arched an eyebrow. "Oh?" Carter met his gaze. "You should have just killed me." Before the overseer could react, Carter moved. One guard went down instantly, his throat crushed. Another reached for his weapon, but Carter was already there, twisting the gun out of his hands and firing a single, precise shot into the overseer's knee. The reptilian screamed, collapsing. Carter grabbed him by the collar, yanking him close. "You're going to tell me how to shut this whole thing down." The overseer, now gasping in pain, spat blood. "You think you can stop this? This is bigger than you." Carter smiled. "Good." He slammed the overseer's head against the control panel, triggering an alarm. And just like that, the breakout began. It started with the containment pods. As the system malfunctioned, the warriors inside began to wake. Some were disoriented, but others knew exactly what had happened to them. And they were angry. Guards flooded the chamber, weapons drawn. But they weren't ready for what came next. Carter moved like a ghost through the chaos, taking out soldiers with brutal efficiency. The freed gladiators, now realizing the truth, turned their rage on the overseers, tearing through their former captors. Elsewhere in the arena, the riots began. The audience, now aware of the corruption behind the matches, had turned violent. Some tried to flee. Others stormed the VIP sections, attacking the rich elites who had controlled their entertainment for years. The arena was collapsing. Carter didn't stop. He led the fighters through the facility, taking down security forces, overriding lockdown protocols, and ensuring that no one who had profited from the system escaped unscathed. By the time the sun rose over the smoldering ruins of the once great Galactic Gladiator Arena, the entire galaxy had already heard the news. The system had fallen. And at the center of it all was a human. The arena was in ruins. Smoke curled into the air, the once mighty Colosseum now little more than a battlefield littered with wreckage and bodies. The uprising had torn through the ranks of the overseers, their empire crumbling in a single night of blood and fire. Fighters, once shackled by a corrupt system, were now free. Some fled, seeking new lives beyond the arena's reach. Others stayed, watching as the dust settled, waiting to see what came next. Carter stood in the center of it all, breathing steadily. His hands were stained with blood, not all of it alien. His muscles ached, but his mind was clear. He had done what needed to be done. But the arena's masters weren't finished yet. A deep, mechanical hum filled the air. The ground beneath him vibrated. From the ruins of the main control tower, something massive stirred. A final contingency plan. The Colosseum's ultimate weapon. The war machine emerged. It was something ancient, something built in the days when gladiators weren't just fighters but instruments of destruction. Towering over the battlefield, its body was a fusion of alien technology and raw brutality. Blades jutted from its arms, energy cannons hummed along its shoulders, and its single glowing eye locked onto Carter with inhuman precision. The crowd, what was left of it, fell silent. Even the victorious rebels, warriors hardened by years of battle, took a step back. Carter exhaled. Of course they had a backup plan. The war machine moved first. A plasma blast ripped through the ground where Carter had been standing a moment earlier. He rolled, dodging effortlessly, scanning for weaknesses. It was heavily armored. Standard weapons wouldn't work. He needed something bigger. His eyes flicked to the wreckage of an old energy turret, half buried in debris. It was risky, but he didn't have time to hesitate. He sprinted, dodging another blast, feeling the heat singe the air around him. The war machine adjusted, anticipating his movement. A blade the size of a small vehicle slashed toward him. Carter slid beneath it, grabbing a discarded explosive charge from a fallen guard as he went. One shot. He vaulted onto the turret's remains, using the last functional piece of its targeting system to lock onto the war machine's central core. He threw the explosive. Fired. The shot struck the explosive mid-air, igniting it just as it hit the machine's core. A blinding explosion tore through the battlefield. The war machine staggered, its systems overloading, sparks flying from its joints. Carter didn't wait. He ran straight toward it. With one final leap, he climbed onto its damaged frame, ripped open an exposed panel, and emptied an entire plasma clip into its neural interface. The machine convulsed. Then, with a deafening roar, it collapsed. The silence that followed was almost eerie. Then, a single voice called out, "He did it!" And then another. And another. The cheer spread, growing louder, filling the ruins of the arena with a sound that wasn't of war or violence, but of victory. Carter stepped away from the wreckage, exhaling slowly. It was over. But he wasn't staying. He turned, slipping through the chaos while the others were still celebrating. He had no interest in ruling the ruins of the arena. No desire to become a symbol or a leader. The galaxy would remember his name, but he had no intention of letting it find him again. By the time the celebrations died down and the fighters looked for him, Carter was gone. The legend spread fast. Stories traveled from one planet to the next, growing wilder with each retelling. Some said Carter had single-handedly destroyed the entire Gladiator Empire. Others claimed he had taken down the war machine with nothing but his bare hands. The truth was already becoming myth. In the underworld, mercenaries whispered his name with reverence. In the halls of power, politicians worried about what he represented, a human, an unknown variable, someone who had proven that even the most rigid systems could be shattered. And in the darker corners of the galaxy, there were those who saw him not as a hero, but as a problem. A human with a kill count too high to calculate. A soldier who had walked into the most brutal arena in existence and left undefeated. That kind of power made people nervous. Bounties were placed. Inquiries were made. But no one could find him. Some said he had retired to a distant world, living in solitude. Others claimed he was still fighting, taking contracts in places too remote to track. One thing was certain. No one would ever underestimate a human again.